This sounds like the gripping premise of a mystery or thriller story. The man, reeling from his mother's death, is thrown into a web of suspicion by her cryptic letter. The notes warning about his brother and the mention of that night in the attic suggest a dark family secret tied to their father's mysterious death years ago. As he digs deeper, he might uncover hidden betrayals, suppressed memories, or even a cover-up involving his brother and the events in the attic. The investigation could reveal shocking truths, perhaps his brother's involvement in their father's death, a family conspiracy, or even something supernatural tied to the attic itself. If you're looking for a way to expand this into a full story, here's a quick outline based on the premise. The discovery. The man, let's call him David, receives the letter 2 weeks after his mother's funeral. The handwriting is unmistakably hers, but the message is vague and chilling. David's relationship with his brother, Mark, has always been strained, but he never suspected anything sinister. The mention of that night in the attic stirs vague childhood memories of their father's death, ruled an accident but never fully explained. The investigation begins. David starts asking questions, starting with his brother. Mark is evasive, dismissive, or even hostile, claiming no memory of any attic incident. David searches the family home, now half abandoned, and finds old photos, journals, or objects in the attic that trigger fragmented memories. A locked trunk, a strange symbol, or a bloodstain on the floorboards. Uncovering secrets. As David digs deeper, he finds evidence of family dysfunction. Their father's erratic behavior before his death, their mother's silence, and Mark's unexplained absences as a teen. Maybe he uncovers a hidden police report suggesting foul play or a neighbor's testimony about hearing screams that night. Each clue points to Mark knowing more than he lets on. The twist. The truth could go several ways. Betrayal. Mark was involved in their father's death, perhaps accidentally or out of anger, and their mother covered it up to protect him, but her guilt led to the letter. Supernatural element. The attic holds a darker secret, maybe a ritual or entity tied to their father's death, and Mark's behavior suggests he's still under its influence. Misunderstanding. The letter wasn't about Mark but a misdirection, and the real secret involves their mother or another family member entirely. Climax and resolution. David confronts Mark in the attic, leading to a tense showdown. The truth comes out. Perhaps Mark confesses, or David uncovers a final piece of evidence, like a hidden letter from their mother or a recording. The resolution could see David forgiving his brother, seeking justice, or grappling with an unresolved mystery. If the truth is too horrifying to accept, the attic's shadow, David's hands trembled as he held the letter, the familiar loops of his mother's handwriting slicing through the fog of grief. 2 weeks since her funeral, and now this. A single sheet of paper postmarked the day she died, as if she'd known her time was running out. Don't trust your brother. He knows what happened that night in the attic. The words burned into his mind, each one a splinter under his skin. He sat at the kitchen table in the old family home, the air heavy with dust and memories. The house had been empty since their mother's death, its silence broken only by the creak of floorboards and the distant hum of a refrigerator that hadn't worked in years. David's brother Mark was due to arrive soon to discuss selling the place, but now David wasn't sure he could face him. Not after this. The attic. That word alone stirred something primal, a half-buried memory from when he was 9. Their father's death had been a blur, officially a fall from the attic ladder, a broken neck, a tragedy chalked up to too much whiskey and a loose rung. But David remembered the whispers between his parents before that night, the way Mark, just 12, had started locking his bedroom door. And the attic itself, dark, cluttered, forbidden. He hadn't been up there since. He folded the letter and shoved it into his pocket, his heart pounding. Mark was hiding something. He always had been, those cold, guarded eyes, the way he'd deflect questions about their childhood with a laugh that never reached his face. David needed answers, and the attic was the only place to start. The stairs groaned under his weight as he climbed to the second floor, the air growing colder with each step. The attic door was at the end of the hall, its paint chipped, the knob stiff with rust. He hesitated, his mother's words echoing. He knows what happened. Swallowing hard, he turned the knob and pushed. The attic smelled of mildew and time, the single bulb flickering as it cast jagged shadows across the slanted ceiling. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, their contents spilling out. Old clothes, photo albums, a child's toy truck with a broken wheel. David's breath caught as he spotted the ladder, still bolted to the floor where their father had fallen. The wood looked untouched, no sign of the loose rung the police report had mentioned. He moved deeper, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Near the back, tucked under a tarp, was a wooden trunk he didn't recognize. Its lock was rusted but intact, the lid carved with a strange, spiraling symbol that made his skin crawl. He knelt, running his fingers over the etching, when a floorboard creaked behind him. "David!" He spun, heart lurching. Mark stood at the top of the stairs, his silhouette framed by the dim light. His brother's face was unreadable, but his hands were stuffed in his pockets, shoulders tense. "You're here early," David said, forcing his voice steady. He stood, keeping the trunk at his back. Mark shrugged, stepping into the attic. "Thought we could get a head start. What are you doing up here?" David's hand brushed the letter in his pocket. "Just looking. Mom left some stuff behind." Mark's eyes narrowed, just for a second. "Yeah, like what?" David's pulse quickened. He wanted to confront Mark, to shove the letter in his face and demand answers, but something in his brother's stance, the way he lingered near the ladder, made him pause. "Nothing important," David lied. "Just old photos." Mark nodded, but his gaze flicked to the trunk. "You shouldn't poke around up here. Place is a mess, dangerous." "Like it was for Dad." The words slipped out before David could stop them. Mark froze, his jaw tightening. "What's that supposed to mean?" David's mouth went dry. He could back off, pretend it was nothing, but the letter's warning screamed in his mind. "You tell me, Mark, you were here that night." "What happened?" For a long moment, Mark said nothing. Then he laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "You're still hung up on that? Dad fell, David. He was drunk. You were a kid. You don't remember it right." But David did remember. Not the fall, but the aftermath. Mark's silence, their mother's red-rimmed eyes, the way she'd locked the attic door and never spoke of it again. "Mom thought you knew something," David said, his voice low. "She wrote it down." Mark's smile vanished. "Wrote what?" David's hand closed around the letter, but before he could pull it out, a sharp crack echoed through the attic. The bulb overhead flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. David's flashlight beam darted wildly, catching Mark's face, pale, eyes wide, not with fear but something else, something like recognition. "David," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper. "You need to leave now." But David didn't move. The attic felt alive, the air thick with something more than dust. And in the shadows, he swore he heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, coming from inside the trunk. The attic's pulse, the tapping from the trunk, grew louder. A deliberate rhythm that seemed to sync with David's racing heartbeat. He froze, his flashlight beam locked on the carved symbol, its spirals glinting like an eye in the dark. Mark stood motionless near the attic ladder, his face half-shadowed, but his eyes gleamed with something David couldn't place. Fear, guilt, or something worse. "Mark, what's in there?" David's voice was barely above a whisper, the air in the attic thick and oppressive, like it was pressing down on his chest. Mark took a step forward, his boots heavy on the creaking floorboards. "I told you to leave, David. You don't know what you're messing with." "Then tell me." David snapped, his fear giving way to anger. He yanked the letter from his pocket and thrust it toward Mark, the paper trembling in his hand. "Mom wrote this, said not to trust you. Said you know what happened that night. So what was it, Mark? What happened to Dad?" Mark's gaze locked on the letter, and for a moment his expression cracked, raw, unguarded, like a child caught in a lie. Then he lunged, snatching the paper before David could react. He scanned it, his jaw tightening, and when he looked up, his eyes were cold. "She had no right," he muttered, crumpling the letter in his fist. "No right to what?" David stepped closer, ignoring the instinct screaming at him to run. The tapping in the trunk was incessant now, a heartbeat of its own. "What did you do, Mark? What happened in this attic?" Mark's hand twitched, as if he might swing, but instead he turned and paced toward the far wall, his shadow stretching grotesquely across the slanted ceiling. "You were too young to understand," he said, his voice low, almost drowned by the tapping. "You still are." "Stop talking in circles," David's shout echoed, startlingly loud in the confined space. He grabbed a crowbar from a pile of tools near the trunk, his knuckles white around the cold metal. "Open it, Mark. Whatever's in there, I'm done with secrets." Mark spun, his face a mask of fury, but before he could speak, the tapping stopped. The silence was worse, heavy, unnatural, like the attic was holding its breath. Then from the trunk came a low, guttural sound, not quite human, not quite animal. A moan or a word distorted by wood and time. David's blood ran cold. "What the hell is that?" Mark's eyes darted to the trunk, then back to David. "You don't want to know," he said, his voice breaking. "You think you do, but you don't." David ignored him, kneeling beside the trunk. The symbol on the lid seemed to pulse under his flashlight, its curves twisting in ways that hurt his eyes. He jammed the crowbar under the lid, prying with all his strength. The lock groaned but held. "Help me or I'll do it myself," he growled. Mark hesitated, then stepped forward, his movements jerky like a puppet on strings. "Fine," he said, his voice barely audible. "But when you see it, don't say I didn't warn you." Together they forced the lock, the rusted metal snapping with a sound like a gunshot. The lid creaked open, releasing a wave of stale, metallic air that made David gag. Inside, nestled among tattered cloth, was a small, leather-bound book, its cover embossed with the same spiraling symbol. Beneath it, something glinted, a rusted knife, its blade stained dark. David reached for the book, but Mark grabbed his wrist, his grip bruising. "Don't," he hissed. "You open that, and it's not just us anymore." "What's that supposed to mean?" David yanked his arm free, clutching the book. Its leather was warm, almost alive under his fingers. He flipped it open, revealing pages of dense, handwritten text in their mother's script, dates, names, and phrases that made no sense. Binding, threshold, blood for blood. Scattered among the words were sketches of the attic, the ladder, the symbol, and one sentence circled in red: "He made a deal and we paid the price." David's stomach churned. "A deal? What deal, Mark? What did Dad do?" Mark backed away, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the open trunk. "It wasn't just Dad," he whispered. "Mom knew, she helped him, and when it went wrong," he trailed off, his gaze darting to the ladder as if expecting something to climb up from below. The attic seemed to contract, the shadows growing sharper, the air colder. David's flashlight flickered, and the low moan came again, not from the trunk but from the walls themselves, a chorus of whispers that crawled under his skin. He stumbled back, the book slipping from his hands. "What is this place?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Mark's laugh was bitter, broken. "You think Dad fell? You think it was an accident?" He pointed at the trunk, his hand trembling. "He opened something he shouldn't have, something that wanted out. And Mom, she kept it locked away, until now." The whispers grew louder, forming words David couldn't understand but felt in his bones. The symbol on the trunk glowed faintly, and the knife inside twitched as if nudged by an invisible hand. David's mind raced, his mother's letter, the attic, the night their father died. It wasn't just a secret. It was something alive, something waiting. And Mark had known all along. The price of truth David's breath caught as the whispers in the attic grew into a cacophony, a chorus of voices that seemed to claw at the edges of his sanity. The leather-bound book lay open at his feet, its pages fluttering as if caught in a wind he couldn't feel. The symbol on the trunk pulsed with a sickly light, and the rusted knife inside quivered, its blade catching the faint glow like a hungry eye. Mark stood frozen, his face a mask of terror and resignation, as if he'd always known this moment would come. "Mark, talk to me," David shouted, his voice nearly lost in the din. "What did Dad do? What's in this book?" Mark's eyes were wild, darting between David and the trunk. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just a book, it's a door." He took a shaky step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Dad found something in this house, something old. He thought he could control it, use it. Money, power, he was desperate after the business went under. Mom helped him, but it backfired. It wanted more than they could give." David's mind reeled, the letter's words flashing through his head. "Don't trust your brother, he knows." He grabbed Mark's collar, pulling him close. "And you? What did you do?" Mark's face crumpled, tears mixing with the sweat on his cheeks. "I was 12, David. I didn't understand. They made me help. Mom said it was to protect us. But that night, Dad wasn't enough. It wanted blood, and he gave it his own. I saw it happen. I saw," he choked, his voice breaking. "I saw it take him." The attic seemed to shudder, the walls creaking as if the house itself were alive. David released Mark, stumbling back toward the book. He flipped through its pages, his hands shaking. His mother's handwriting detailed a ritual, a pact with something she called the threshold. Symbols, offerings, blood to bind it. The final entry was dated the night their father died. "It's awake. He broke the rules. We can't stop it now." David's stomach twisted. "This thing, it's still here." Mark nodded, his voice barely audible. "Mom locked it away, the trunk, the symbol, it's a seal, but you opened it, David. You broke it." The knife in the trunk rose, floating an inch above the cloth, its blade spinning slowly. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, low and guttural, speaking words David's mind refused to translate. He slammed the trunk shut, but the light from the symbol bled through the wood, brighter now, searing his eyes. The air grew heavy, pressing against his chest, and the ladder to the attic rattled as if something were climbing up. "Mark, what do we do?" David's voice was hoarse, his flashlight flickering out. The only light now came from the trunk, casting grotesque shadows that writhed like living things. Mark grabbed the book, clutching it to his chest. "We burn it. The book, the trunk, everything. It's the only way." He darted to a corner of the attic, pulling an old gas can from beneath a tarp. The smell of gasoline filled the air as he doused the trunk, his hands trembling but resolute. David hesitated, the letter's warning ringing in his ears. "Don't trust your brother." But the voice from the walls was louder now, closer, and the knife in the trunk was scraping against the wood, trying to get out. He grabbed a matchbook from a nearby box, his mother's initials etched on the cover. "Do it," he said, striking a match. The flame caught instantly, the gasoline igniting with a whoosh that sent heat searing across David's face. The trunk burned, the symbol charring black, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, angrier, until the attic shook with their fury. Mark screamed, dropping the book as it burst into flames, the pages curling into ash. The knife flew from the trunk, embedding itself in the wall inches from David's head. "Run!" Mark shouted, shoving David toward the ladder. But as David reached it, the rungs twisted under his hands, cold and slick like living flesh. He stumbled, falling to the floor, and saw it, a shadow in the shape of a man rising from the burning trunk. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth a gaping void, and it reached for Mark. "No," David lunged, tackling Mark to the ground as the shadow's fingers grazed his brother's shoulder. The attic was a furnace now, flames licking the walls, the air thick with smoke. The shadow recoiled, its form dissolving into the fire, but its voice lingered, a final hiss, blood for blood. They crawled down the ladder, coughing, the house groaning as if it might collapse. Outside, they collapsed on the lawn, the night air cold against their skin. The house burned, flames swallowing the attic, the roof caving in with a roar. David clutched the letter, the only thing he'd saved, its edges singed but intact. Mark sat beside him, staring at the inferno. "It's gone," he whispered. "It's finally gone." But David wasn't sure. The letter felt heavier in his hand, the words "Don't trust your brother" etched into his mind. He looked at Mark, whose face was unreadable in the flickering light. Had Mark told the whole truth? Or had he burned the house to hide something else, something worse? As the fire trucks wailed in the distance, David slipped the letter back into his pocket. David burned the photo, but the image stayed with him. Some truths, he realized, were better left buried. But as he lay in the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that the attic wasn't gone. Not really. It was waiting somewhere for blood.